Chapter 21. Out of no thing, everything comes. Imagine there was no universe. What sort of mental picture comes to mind? Total blackness extending in all directions to infinity. That's the typical answer. We take all the planets, stars, and galaxies, and we make them vanish, leaving behind an endless expanse of empty space. We think in this fashion because most of us are referencing what we were taught in school science, where the nature of reality was never explained as anything deeper than atoms and molecules stacked in a three-dimensional arena, the universe according to Newton, which every modern physicist knows is outdated. In our present mental exercise, although we've successfully done away with all the matter of the universe, we've left behind a ready-made container for it, space, as well as a mind contemplating this container. That's you. Despite there being no universe, notice how you've accidentally invented the concept of color, specifically black, as something definite and distinct from white. But the absence of the universe is more than just the absence of things. If we think of an expanse that is black in color, where all the laws of physics still apply, for want of a few objects to float about, then we are not thinking deeply enough about this situation. No universe means no forms, no laws of physics, no empty arena of space, no distinction of anything from anything. Absolute nothingness, which is not the same as an endless expanse of physical space that is waiting for something to pop into existence. For the purposes of this chapter, we shall call this profound absence the void. It is, of course, the very same concept that I've been calling the infinite throughout this book, and Brahman in the previous chapter. The most interesting aspect of the void is that it is incomprehensible to the mind. The mind wants to differentiate and categorize, but the void resists our attempts to imagine it. We may think of it as endless black, or we may think of it as blinding white. It is neither, for without a universe, there is no distinction between light and darkness. If we could imagine the void, it would not be the void. It would be the form of a thing distinct from some other thing. There's an old philosophical expression, out of nothing, nothing comes. Ex nihilo nihil fit, for those who like their Latin. It is commonly used as a defense for monotheism. It has a certain logic to it, but it is equally true to say, out of nothing, everything comes. It all depends on what you mean by nothing. Do you mean a container of empty space, which is a thing? Or do you mean the absence of form itself, which is truly no thing? The void may be described as the formless essence from which the universe springs. In Eastern thinking, this is acceptable. Whereas in the West, people tend to scratch their heads at the notion of something coming from the void. They feel that there must be an eternally pre-existent God who creates the universe. This objection only occurs because they have been conditioned to think of the void as mundane, empty space. They ask, how can a universe come from nothing? It didn't come from nothing. It came from no thing. The void is the incomprehensible mystery behind the universe. The Westerner then suspects, isn't this just a fanciful way of saying that the void is God? Well, yes, but it's more accurate to say that God is a fanciful way of describing the void. The monotheistic concept of God is full of detail and complexity. He is a conscious being who is good, just, holy, loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing. The attributes of God is a common term in Christian teaching. God is anything but void. He's an actual person. A Christian commonly argues, how can something as complex as the universe exist unless it was created by God? The atheist counters, so who created God? The Christian answers, God was not created. He is eternal, having no beginning or end. But the atheist recognizes that this answer is a cheat, because the Christian originally argued that the existence of complexity requires explanation. Then he presented a complex being as the answer and changed the rules to suit himself. It's clear that if we are to use the word God in an intelligent manner, we cannot refer to a complex entity with mental faculties, emotions, desires, ethics. We must view God as an incomprehensible higher order of reality, an impenetrable mystery, an unknowable otherness, void of all categories that apply to space-time. God isn't nothing, but he, she, it is certainly no thing. The void, the absolute, the whole, the infinite, the all, the ground of being, these are all much purer terms than God because they strip away the excess baggage. So the void is no thing, but it is equally everything because everything that exists came out of it in the Big Bang. A tricky question arises here. How did sequential time, as we experience it, begin? How does the void start time when starting is an act that takes place in sequential time? Time already had to exist for time to exist. Confusing, I know. But the question is only problematic if we believe in the existence of time as an actual dimension. A dimension is something real that requires explanation. On the other hand, if time isn't real, then it doesn't require explanation. Change is real, and that's all we mean by time, the measurement of change. Without change, nothing could exist, except perhaps a universe or a God in freeze frame, incapable of motion or thought, no more alive than a photograph. This reminds me of a recurring nightmare I had as a child. In one version of the dream, I'm on my bicycle, pedaling frantically down an empty street, attempting to outrun a strange phenomenon that's sweeping along the landscape behind me, getting closer by the second. It looks like a gigantic shimmering curtain that I can partially see through. Somehow, I know that its function is to devour time. If it overtakes me, I will be frozen in time forever. And then it happens. Everything abruptly stops moving, including my body, just like hitting the pause button on a DVD. I can't move my arms and legs, can't even shift my gaze as much as a millimeter. There is no pain, but I'm stuck in a manner more profound than any bodily paralysis. My first thought is, okay, maybe I can just... And then there is a terrifying realization. My consciousness is stuck inside a single slice of time, and it can never become unstuck, because there is no time here to unstick me with. The curtain isn't just freezing matter and letting time tick on. It's literally freezing time itself. This fills me with the horror of knowing that rescue is impossible. I will never die, and I will never move from this spot for all eternity. That was the most terrifying dream I've ever had, because it was like being in hell. I can still vividly recall the relief of waking up from it. Although the idea of remaining conscious while stuck in time is pure fantasy, it illustrates a powerful point. Where there is no time, there can never be time. So the way out of the philosophical problem of the origin of time is to accept the premise that there never was a moment of creation when time began. Time, or change, existed before the Big Bang. The void has always done what it is doing, and it always will. All we can say is that it is the nature of the void to unfold temporally and spatially, simply because we observe that this is what is happening. After all, here we are. Ultimately, the manifest universe will come to an end. It is predicted there will either be a big crunch to match its Big Bang or a big freeze. An expanding universe filled with physical bodies of finite energy must finally succumb to its own gravity and collapse in on itself, or burn out. The latter scenario appears to contradict what I've been saying in previous chapters about the eternal nature of energy. But the energy itself doesn't vanish. it only becomes unusable. This is what's called entropy, the observable principle that order tends towards disorder. Entropy is why the pyramids of Egypt don't look as pretty today as they did when they were originally built, and they can't magically spring back to their former glory. The inevitable end of the universe sounds depressing, but it isn't really. Whatever shape that ending takes, the universe will simply return to the state it was in prior to its emergence, void. And since the void brought forth the universe once, it seems natural that it can and will do it again, and again and again, forever. It may be that the universe is cyclical, oscillating from Big Bang to Big Crunch to Big Bang, like breathing. Or it may be that multiple universes come and go like bubbles on the surface of boiling water. They form, they expand, they burn out, many at the same time and many more in an eternal succession. This is all speculation, of course, but the view that the universe is a once-only phenomenon is likewise unproven. If the latter seems like the most natural, logical position, that is likely because you've inherited the Judeo-Christian view of time as a structure that had a definite beginning and is moving towards a once-for-all time goal. You were subjected to this conditioning by virtue of your place in Western culture, whether you were raised as a Christian or not. Once this becomes clear, a comparison between the linear and cyclical views of time reveals the latter to be much more logical. Our experience of time is filled with cycles. You inhale, you exhale, then you inhale again. You eat, you excrete, and you eat again. Night follows day, and day follows night, as you sleep and rise. The tides of the ocean move in and out from the beach. The moon goes through its phases. Each year the same 4 seasons occur, during which time a great deal of life will grow, thrive, and die, only to be reborn annually. The duration of a human life appears to be linear, moving from the energy of youth to the frailty of old age and eventual death. But from a wider perspective, even this is part of a cycle, as we give birth to our replacements, who later give birth to their replacements. The evolution of life appears to be linear, but even this may be part of a larger cycle. Consider the dinosaurs. When they were wiped out, the evolutionary process merely suffered a reboot, and this time large mammals emerged. And if we are stupid enough to wipe ourselves out, something else will evolve in our place. The Western mentality, with its linear view of time, is always restless because it feels there is a destination to strive for, but it has no idea what this destination is. In reality, there is no linear goal to life. We would be a lot less agitated if we saw our purpose as relaxing into the natural rhythms of life, right here in the present. To do that, we have to understand time as cyclical. And when we do, it's not a big stretch of the imagination to conceive of the entire history of the universe we inhabit as one cycle in an endless succession. To the Christian, I imagine the cyclical perspective is unsatisfying. Christianity views fleshly existence as a training ground. Mortal life is lived in order to die and finally get satisfaction in the next life. The idea of mortality being continually recycled for all eternity is abhorrent to the Christian, because he has been conditioned to hate his earthly life of sin and suffering. Those of us who love life, and who understand that all life is I in manifold guises, can take delight in the universe's ever-changing shape. On such a grand scale as the birth and death of endless universes, it is actually a comfort to know that each of my tiny little lives must forget the others it has lived and know nothing of its future lives. True eternal life is to know that I am all that ever was, is, and will be, without consciousness being crushed by such a colossal weight of experience. When this is truly grasped, it is deeply liberating. When I first understood the infinite as my true identity, I thought of it as a vast collector of experiences. I took comfort in the idea that nothing I experienced would ever be lost. The ground of being, the real me, has instant access to it all. But I've come to see that I was missing the point. Consciousness happens right here, not up there, and with good reason. There is an elusive insight to be gained in watching a young child experience the world. Everything is new and exciting. The adult realizes that life cannot be like this for him, at least not nearly as often, because he has lived so much already. Life has become duller because he has already experienced much of what it has to offer. He has memories that he treasures, many that have leaked away through inattention, and others he wishes he could forget. And although he has a lot of living yet to do, he sees something marvelous and desirable about a child starting from scratch. He might even experience a degree of envy. And then it hits him. This is just as it should be. Our lives are supposed to be recycled like this. The burdens of our memories lifted off so that we can experience it all again, only differently. The cyclical nature of the universe implies that it is not heading for an ultimate destination where all of its striving comes to a finish for all time. If the universe is cyclical, then it is not purpose-driven towards a final goal, such as the Christian's judgment day and the subsequent creation of a permanent and lasting paradise. The religionist's stance is nothing more than a desire to freeze time at a point where conditions are ideally suited for him. But time is merely a synonym for change, and change is the cornerstone of existence itself. Without time, without change, there is nothing at all. This is perhaps why we cannot visualize heaven without secretly thinking of it as boring beyond belief. Can you imagine a life that consists of praising God for all eternity? A life devoid of conflict and adventure, where joy is never as joyful as it was on earth because you can no longer experience the transition out of sorrow? Can you imagine what it would be like to go on accumulating memories for 1 trillion years without any of the drama that makes life interesting? Heaven starts to sound suspiciously like its opposite, hell. And in heaven, what would become of the memory of your earthly life when it is buried beneath the weight of 1 trillion years of memory collecting? And what tedious, dreary memories they must be in a world without drama. When we desire to live forever, we don't realize the full extent of what we're wishing for. We're hoping to preserve our individual existence like a photograph, to stop time, to stop change, when existence itself is change, and forgetting is as much a part of change as remembering. And what is death other than a form of forgetting, with birth bringing renewal? It is absurd to ask, what is the purpose of the universe? This is merely another way of framing the question, what is the finish line for the process of change? But the end of change means the end of time, for time and change mean the same thing. When there is no time, there can be no material form, and so we are left with emptiness. There can be no eternal freezing of the universe at some mythical ultimate objective, otherwise there is no universe. In searching for the meaning of life, we should not be looking to the future, for if there is no ultimate objective, then the future holds no key to the meaning of our individual lives. There is no future and no past outside of the recording device of your brain. If we are to attach meaning to our lives, that meaning must be accessible in the only moment that's real, right now. Every experience of your life, and every life, is the eternal flux of the universe. The void manifests itself as seemingly individual parts and gazes at itself as though the things it is looking at are separate. In doing so, the void becomes something tangible. If it did not play this game with itself, the void would truly be nothing. It would not even be conscious, for when there is nothing to be conscious of, there is no consciousness. In a manner of speaking, the existence of God is as dependent upon the universe as the universe is upon God. If God were not engaged in this adventure of duality, he would be comatose. We might as well say non-existent. But we must be careful not to rely too much on anthropomorphisms, which are merely crude approximations of the ungraspable. It is too easy to slip back into patterns of Western conditioning and to think of the void as a divine personality presiding over creatures in a fatherly fashion. The void, as its name implies, has no form. Out of this mysterious non-dual essence, patterns arise and descend eternally. Whole universes come and go in a dance that had no beginning and will have no end. You are that dance. There is no divine consciousness with which to seek union. There is nothing else to find except you, right here, right now, for always. You are formlessness made real through an infinitude of forms across an eternity of change. When I first grasped the idea of non-duality, I thought of it as a higher order of reality that I had to reach, a transcendent realm where Big Me, up there, orchestrated the lives of all the little me's down here. I didn't realize it, but I was still suffering from a lingering monotheistic outlook. Now I realize that there is no Big Me presiding over the universe. Consciousness is entirely dependent on the subject-object duality of the universe. Non-duality is a slightly unfortunate term, because we instinctively think that duality is its opposite. This is how we treat all other words that can be preceded by non. Sense and nonsense, existence and non-existence, conformist and non-conformist. All of these are opposites. But non-duality, when correctly understood, is the unique idea of oneness that has no opposite. If it had an opposite, it wouldn't be oneness. The duality that we experience is not separate from the non-duality underneath. There aren't two realities, above and below. Duality is merely the manner in which a non-dual reality manifests. As such, duality and non-duality are one and the same. One of the drawbacks of our reliance on words is that we unconsciously fall into the habit of thinking exclusively in a manner dictated by existing language structure. This is why it's so difficult to wrap our minds around non-duality. Practically speaking, we see duality all around us, so we mistakenly think that the non-duality is something else that we have to discover under the surface, when the duality is the non-duality. Nothing is separate. One of my first insights into non-duality was that the physical universe had an illusory quality. And while that is true, I now see that the illusion of the material world is the very basis of consciousness. Heaven, paradise, nirvana, whatever you want to call it, is right here in the adventures of our earthbound lives. Heaven is a walk on the beach with the wind blowing through my hair. It is the scent of cocoa rising from the cup on my desk. No pretentious poetry is intended here. I have literally arrived at the place I was seeking. In fact, I've been at the destination all along, only I couldn't see it for what it was. I thought duality was something I had to escape from. But escape to what? To the formless essence of the infinite? What is that? It is me. It is everything, but it is also nothing at all, unless there is the appearance of duality to give it form. I was trying to get somewhere, only to realize it's right here under my nose. It always was and always will be. Each day of your life is like the universe in miniature. It begins, it is filled with experiences, it ends, and it begins anew. There is no more profound meaning to life than to wake up in the morning and ask yourself, "Now, what interesting things shall I do today?" I find it heartwarming that all this deep philosophizing takes us right back to what comes naturally to any child on his summer break from school. And I find it hilarious that this oh-so-serious pursuit of truth has no more ultimate significance than a kid playing with toys. If there is any value in what I'm doing here, it consists in helping adults to become less serious and more playful in life. Perhaps it is too much for the scientist to muse upon the depressing realization that the great body of knowledge to which he dedicates most of his life must ultimately come to naught. What about the revolutionary whose life is dedicated to making a positive impact on the world? What's it all for if everything perishes? This is certainly a depressing situation if you view the universe as a once-only phenomenon. When we face the inevitability of the end of everything, all our serious strivings become no more important than a child at play. But when the universe is understood as cyclical, the darkness is banished, because the one factor that remains when all else is lost is the singular I at the heart of existence itself, and that I is you. You are basically a child at play who never truly dies. All your noble endeavours should be undertaken with a lightness of spirit, valued for their temporary significance alone. In other words, what we do matters for the time in which it matters, and then it doesn't. At another time and place, in a future universe, something else will matter until it doesn't. Life should be understood as a big game we're all playing, one that never had a beginning and will never have an end.